This week on Table for One, we're talking about the Goonies Adventure Card Game, Shakespeare Backstage expansion, and Zombicide Black Plague, as well as playing non-solo games solo with your own variant. Hey everybody, Anthony here. This is episode 2 of Table for One, and this week we're going to be talking about a couple of games I've been playing lately, both of which I've written reviews for recently. They're up on the website. And another one that I picked up back at Origins and have been playing throughout the summer, and wanted to talk about kind of after some time had passed, and kind of an interesting take on solo gaming just because of the scope of it. Also a discussion topic recommended by some people on Twitter that I very much understand because I do it all the time, and that's turning a non-solo game into a solo experience. So I kind of wanted to talk about some of the games with which I've done that, how I do that, and then kind of throw it to you guys and ask, how do you do that? Because I find it a very interesting topic, because there's so many awesome games out there, and sometimes when you're playing something, you can just tell it would work if it had a solo variant, especially because some of those solo variants are basically high score chases. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we dive into the recent plays, I did want to kind of talk about a couple of things that have happened recently. Some of the stuff on the horizon. The first one, of course, is the new Shadi Torbay game, which was announced a little while back, but I officially, got my pre-order in, so I'm very excited now. And that's Nautilion. This will be the fourth one in the series. Unfortunately, still published by Z-Man, so if you're interested, make sure you pre-order and get your copy now, because who knows how long it'll be before it's out of print. I'm sorry for everybody out there still waiting for your copy of Onirim 2nd Edition. I play mine fairly frequently, and I understand why you're waiting for it. It's a tough one to find, and there's no reason for it. It's the core of the series. They're still publishing the series. Why not republish the first book? It's kind of like when you go to Barnes & Noble and you're finding a new series or a new, like a third or fourth book in a series, and you're like, this looks really interesting, but I should get the first one, and they don't carry it. Why would you carry the fourth one if you're not going to carry the first one? That's how I feel about this. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who agree with me. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. But that is coming soon. I've seen dates anywhere between November and January, so hopefully here before the end of the year, we get that one in front of us. The other big one that's kind of on the horizon, everybody's waiting for, is the Arkham Horror LCG. Now, this is not typically my cup of tea. I'm not a big Cthulhu, Arkham kind of guy, but I do have this copy of Mansions of Madness in front of me right now. I'm still kind of figuring out how it works, and just the whole idea of the mythos and kind of going through that alone and the challenge of it is interesting to me. It's not the kind of game I would bring to a game group. It's not the kind of experience I really want to build, but it is the kind of game I think in a solo situation that I would really like. I love the Lord of the Rings card game, and from what I've heard from some people who played it at Gen Con, I didn't get a chance to play it myself. It's not really exactly the same designer, so you get some, kind of the same feel from it, but not the exact same. The campaign element alone is a little bit different, but very excited for that. That's definitely on the horizon. You should hear from me on that one probably the week or two after that one comes in. And then, of course, Mansions of Madness, of course. It's sitting here. I will be playing it shortly, and then we'll talk about that as well. So that's kind of some of the stuff on the horizon. I do have the next few episodes mapped out, so there are a few different games you can count on me talking about very soon. We have Imperial Settlers all the way up through the current range of releases. We have the Castles of Burgundy card game, which I've played several more times and am excited to talk about. Hostage Negotiator, just had a recent Kickstarter finish up. Going to be talking about that as well. The Warhammer Quest Adventure card game, finally got those new decks, so we'll be running through that and giving that a go. And of course, we'll be talking about some favorites as well. Lord of the Rings LCG. Hoping to bring some people on who really know that game really well, and we can talk about it more in depth. So, to that end, if you are a solo gamer, if you play a lot of stuff, if you have one game that you are very dedicated to and know a lot about, let me know, especially if you're interested in being on the show. I would love to have you on and talk about it. I don't I don't envision this show being one where I just talk by myself for 20 or 30 minutes every week. I feel like it's something that I want to bring people in on. I want to have conversations. I want to talk about the different strategies and nuances of these games. That's kind of the reason we play solo games, is that we can dive way deeper into them than you would typically a normal game, because you have it to yourself and you can play it whenever you want. So if you have a game like that where you feel super confident, like you've played it 100 times or whatever it is, let me know. And especially if you're willing to come on. All right, so the first one on the list here is the Goonies Adventure Card Game. So this is one that it kind of debuted here over the summer. We picked up a copy at Gen Con. We actually got a chance to play with the designers, Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle. This game from Albino Dragon Games is it's a very interesting one because it's relatively light. It's significantly lighter than I would typically play for a solo game, but it has a lot of interesting mechanics to it. And I think the reason I really like it, and it's kind of wormed its way into my collection, is that it really captures the Goonies quite well. And this is a movie I love. I watched this all the time when I was a kid. I'm a little too young to have seen it when it first came out, early 80s. I was born in 84. But it was on, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon TV, on local access, all the time. So I probably saw this movie 20 or 30 times over the years. Then I loved it. So getting a chance to play through a game of it with the full license, with the photos from the movie, with all the different aspects of it, a lot of fun. Really like this game quite a bit because of that. The game mechanics themselves are relatively light. I don't think they're supposed to be anything more than that. They're designed to be accessible. They're designed to be something that anybody can jump into. It's a family-oriented game. Even the way the game plays, you don't have an individual turn. Everybody plays together. So you kind of discuss it and, everybody comes to a conclusion of what move to make or which cards to play or who's going to do what. There's only one meeple on the board, which, by the way, is a fantastic meeple that has all the different Goonies together. But it's one of those games that, despite all that, you don't really have to deal with the alpha problem quite as much, just because you're going to come to a consensus. You could have one person who decides, like, I'm the leader, I'm going to tell you what to do. But realistically, it's the kind of game that you want to have a discussion about. You want to decide where to go next. And if someone's doing that, you're probably playing with the wrong people anyways. It's too light of a game for that kind of thing. Every game takes about 30 to 45 minutes. So it's just long enough to be engaging, but not so long to be overtaxing as a solo game. Kind of, maybe just a end of the day while watching TV kind of a thing. What you'll be doing is clearing these different locations by matching cards to different challenges that are down there. So kind of similar to most other co-ops, you're spending resources to get rid of challenges with matching symbols. Pretty basic. There are 2 or 3 levels there. You need to clear those challenges. You're then going to be able to unlock different, obstacle tiles that some of them have gems, some of them have additional obstacles you have to face, booby traps that might pop up. But at the end of the day, all these different cards have Goonies artwork. All of them have, events from the movies. The characters you play, there are multiple characters, so each play is going to be a little bit different if you're playing solo. It does work solo, just playing one character, but you can also play multiple characters because it is everybody takes an action at the same time kind of game. So you don't have to change anything to play it solo. There's no variance to it. And overall, I think it works pretty well. I don't think it's a game you should run out and pick up if you've never seen the Goonies before. It's not the best co-op I've ever played, but it's also not a bad one. It's quick, it's accessible. It's something that if your children came over while you're playing and like, what are you doing? Can I help? You'd be able to let them help. Kind of teach them real quick how to play. So that's a good one. Check it out, the Goonies Adventure Card Game. If you're a Goonies fan, it's well worth tracking down. If you're not a Goonies fan, but you need a good solo/family accessible cooperative game, it's still worth a play as well. All right, the next one here is an expansion, a very small expansion, actually, for a multiplayer game with a solo variant, and that's Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare kind of flew under the radar a little bit last year. It is a fairly solid 45-minute to an hour. It's pretty quick. Euro game in which you are putting on plays in Shakespearean Elizabethan England. And how you do this is you recruit different actors and craftsmen to your tableau, and you take actions every round, moving your different workers to the different actors and craftsmen you have available. The twist is that once you've used them, all but one of those used individuals cannot be used the next round. So you only have a limited number of actions for any given round, depending on who's available. So what makes that game interesting is that in certain rounds, you might choose to only take 2 or 3 actions so that you can save your guys for a later round. What Backstage does is it adds a secondary element where those workers you did not use in the primary round of the game can then take actions, quote unquote, backstage. So there'll be a tableau of cards available to everybody playing, but in a solo game, just to you. And you'll be able to take your unused workers and place them on those individual cards. Each of those cards has certain actions. Some of them cost multiple workers. So if you save 2 or 3 workers, you might just take the one action. But they're also pretty powerful. So what it does is it takes away the element of feeling like a round is wasted. There are certain times when, you really just don't have much you can do because you used up all your available actors in the previous round. So you end up sitting there not doing a whole lot for one round. In a multiplayer game, this feels very frustrating. In a solo game, it just feels like a waste of time. So adding this element's very interesting. In the solo game, you can put out your workers however you want to do it. To the actors and the individuals in your tableau, or to the backstage, you just break them up however you want to do it because you're the only one playing, and then you tally everything up. Now, when I went into this, I thought that it would actually ramp up the score way too high. In a multiplayer game, it makes perfect sense because it balances out people who have less actions. In a solo game, it just means you always get all your actions. But typically, I took all, if I could, actions anyways. Because player order does not matter in the solo game. And it's very rare I only took 1 or 2 actions to get the extra point, which is a bonus you could get. So in the end, I ended up roughly around the same score. Now, Shakespeare is a solo game. You're not actually trying to beat anything. You don't lose the game under any circumstances. You're just trying to get a high score. So there's no challenge to it necessarily, except comparing your scores. I did have a good number of scores previously playing the game without this expansion, so I could compare it to that, and it was about in the middle with most of the scores of Backstage, which is about probably where you want to be. It's if they'd been off the charts, like if I was scoring 35-40, the score track stops at 30, then I would feel concerned that it was a little overpowered. But the way it's built, I don't feel like that's the case. So Shakespeare Backstage, if you own Shakespeare, if you've played it solo, or if you have not played it solo and you just own it and would like to get more play out of it, I think the Backstage edition is a good edition. It adds a good amount more stuff to the table, so you're kind of building out a larger tableau of sorts, but it makes it so there are no wasted turns. It fleshes out the game a little bit for multiplayer, and for solo, it just gives you more options, which is always more fun. All right, so the last game I wanted to talk about that has been around the table lately is Zombicide Black Plague. So I discussed this on episode 105, I think, maybe 104, right after Origins, and I talked about, how I would never, ever, ever wanted to play Zombicide. I had no interest. Played it a few times early on with Season 1 and just could not get into it. The game was a little too simple, felt too repetitive. Playing with other people was just kind of a drag. The Black Plague reiteration of the game streamlines a lot of things, adds a lot of elements that kind of give you a little bit more control, adds a little bit of strategy to the game. And of course, the fantasy theme really, really helps to kind of make it a little more interesting. So I wanted to talk about on the Table for One podcast how the solo variant, and I'm not going to say variant, it's a cooperative game, so just playing solo, how that works, how it feels, how it runs. A lot of people do this, especially with a game this big where 20,000 copies of it went out just with the Kickstarter. It's interesting to talk about what makes this game unique to play alone and why I would do so versus, what situations I would really prefer to work with a group. So with a solo game, you end up having to play 4 characters. You have to have a certain number of characters on the board at any given time. Without enough characters, the game doesn't really work. And I think the book might even recommend you play 6, but 4 can work if you do it right. Now, that does add some complexity, trying to keep track of all these different characters you're playing, all their different abilities, all the different options you have available, all their different health ratings. It's a lot. I'm not going to say it's fun necessarily, but at the same time, it gives it more depth than playing just one character if you're playing with a full complement of 5 or 6 people in this game. So that's an interesting aspect of it. You do get the full sense of what everybody can do. It kind of feels like playing an old SNES or PlayStation era RPG where you'll have 3 or 4 characters that you have to keep track of at any time. They all have their own abilities. That's very interesting to me. The other component of it that I find very interesting is the sheer amount of space it takes up. So this is a kind of game that can take, the first couple of missions, scenarios, quests, whatever they're called, they don't take that long, maybe an hour or 2 at the most. They're a normal board game length. But as you move up, as you get to the next level, as you unlock different things, especially if you have the Wolfsburg expansion, this takes up a ton of space. And it takes a good amount of time to complete these different quests. So you're looking at, 3+ hours of the game sitting out there and taking up the largest space in your game group. Now, if you plan to play the game, not a problem. But if it's something you just bring with you on game night, you're unlikely to get a good play out of it. You're probably just unlikely to get people to agree to play at all. So that's an interesting component as well. Playing it solo allows it so you can set it up on your table, you can leave it there for multiple days, you can play a few rounds, come back to it. It's easy to remember where you are. My trick, and if you're just getting into solo games, here's my trick. Always end a round right before you stop, so you know that you're starting a round. If you know the flow of the rounds, it doesn't matter. You'll just pick up where you left off. If you end mid-round, you're never going to remember what you were doing. So always end at the very end of a round. Even if you're just going to the bathroom or getting a snack, finish the round or you're going to forget where you were. You'll accidentally cheat your way through. That's an important part. So Zombicide Black Plague, it plays really well solo. It's very, very interesting. I have, a handful of expansions. I have some of the stuff from the Kickstarter. So I have probably 30 or 40 different characters to choose from. And even if you play with the full 6, that's a ton of different variation and combinations and different ways you can play with a solo game, taking in all these different characters. You add in the level up components, you add up the different kinds of armor and items that you can pull, add in all the tons of different enemies that are now available if you have some of the expansions. and you have a game with tons of replayability. Now, at the end of the day, it's still Zombicide. It's still, effectively a dungeon crawl. It is still a dice rolling game where combat is super simple. So it's not the kind of game where if you want something crunchy and thinky, you're going to go to Zombicide Black Plague. But if you just want to play a board game on a Saturday afternoon by yourself and you want to watch TV while you're doing it, this is one of the better games to do so with. It's going to take long enough. It's going to feel like it's worth it to have it set up, the time to set it up and get it out. And the rules are simple enough that if you're distracted by, the new episode of Luke Cage or, the trying to catch up on Arrow or something, you're not going to be lost. So it's a fun time. I do recommend it. If you have a copy, give it a go solo. If you don't have a copy but you like Zombicide, consider it. Even if you didn't like the original, because I hated the original and I actually really like this one a lot. So I was surprised, honestly. I didn't think I would like it. I was almost humoring myself by giving it a go. And I love it. And I'm honestly thinking about getting, the different paints I don't have yet to give it a go and try to paint some of these zombies. And I'm serious. If you knew me at all, I loathe zombie games. Dead of Winter was probably the only one I would even touch. And now apparently I like Zombicide. So that speaks to, the quality of the game here. All right, guys. So the last thing today for this week is the discussion topic. Now, I posted a few things on Twitter under the BGA Podcast Twitter account. Don't forget, Table for One is part of Board Gamers Anonymous. I am also on Board Gamers Anonymous. I'm one of the hosts. So the anything social media related for this podcast or that one, they're all together. They're under BGA Podcast on Twitter, Board Gamers Anonymous on Facebook. So that's where you're going to find us. But I posted a few questions, and people were great. Got a lot of good answers for this. But I was asking what kind of stuff people want to hear about related to solo games. So one person said they would love to hear more reviews or discussions of solo-only games. I have not yet actually discussed any, and I do plan on doing so next week. Probably one of the next games I'm going to talk about is Hostage Negotiator. It's one of my favorite solo-only games. I'm also going to try to run through all of the existing Oniverse games before Nautilion comes out. So we'll probably have a special episode just for the Oniverse that is evil. Let's say the Oniverse that I have. I was about to say the ones that are easy to get, but Onirim's a little tough right now. So it would be the trilogy that's been recently released. Onirim, Sylveon, and Castellion. The three that come out in the last 2-3 years. So we'll be talking about those as well. But for now, the question that kind of struck at me, because it's something I've been doing a lot lately, is playing non-solo games solo. Now, for a lot of solo gamers, especially veterans out there, the first question is, why would you do that? Because there's so many good solo games to play, or games that have good solo variants. Why would you go out of your way to take a game that is not designed for that and kind of hack it into that? And I would say that some games just are fun to play, and you want to play it more often, and maybe your group doesn't like it, or maybe you just don't get a chance to take it out, or it takes too long, or it's too big, or whatever it is. I have a few games like that where they don't hit the table as much as I would like, and some of them have solo variants, and I get to play them a lot anyways, like Imperial Settlers, even though I can't get it to the table very often, and other ones really don't. Castles of Burgundy is a great example. I had a tough time getting that one to the table for a long time. So I would play it solo. I would just play 2 different people, go against each other. It was mostly solitary, just building on a tableau anyways. So, you didn't even really need a solo variant to do that. Now with this Castles of Burgundy card game, there is actually an official solo variant. And I'm very excited by that, and I've been playing that a lot. But that gives you a sense of, why someone would do that. So I wanted to touch on 3 things that I think are important here. 3 different situations, maybe, in which you might play a game solo that doesn't have a solo variant or just isn't designed for that. The first of those is super relevant for me as a podcaster and blog writer, and that is to learn the game. I learn a lot of new games all the time. I came home from Gen Con with I don't know, 30 plus games. And so the quickest and easiest way to learn a new game for me is not to read the rulebook 3 times or watch a watch it played video, even though Rodney Smith is brilliant and a national treasure for our hobby, what he does for us. But the fastest way for me is really just to sit down, break it out, play it while reading through the rules, and then kind of skim through it again. Even if that takes a couple hours, it's the fastest way. Then I feel the most confident. Issues that are going to come up during gameplay don't come up while you're reading the book. So that ends up meaning I play it by myself a lot. I don't want to subject my gaming group to my learning experiences. I've done that in the past. Go back and listen to our Lewis and Clark episode, and then track down the Board Game Geek thread about how many rules we missed. That's all me. One of the things that I like to do now instead is I set up the game, I run through it. I usually play 2 different characters. Now, some games don't play well with 2, so I'll take out a third. Playing 3 solo is a little tough. You lose track of who's who. So 2 is a good number if it's possible, but it really depends on the game. For example, Terraforming Mars, I learned playing 2 different people, one against the other. And that game was fine. That worked perfectly. There's no variance. The solo version of that game, plays the same as the normal, just with a couple of restrictions that are pretty nominal just to help you score. So that's a good example of a game that works, learning how to play with 2 people. Other games really don't work that well like that. So it just depends on the game itself. But that really helps me. So I just approach it, learning how to play. I'll read through as I go. It might take an extra hour or 2 to run through it, but then I feel really confident that I know how to play it. And then when I take it to the game group, I feel like I can teach it carefully. I've gone through some of the situations that might come up. I've personally now played it at least twice because I played both characters. The actual outcome of that game doesn't matter because it's almost impossible to divorce in your head the 2 different sides. Somehow, I always end up rooting for one of the different colors that I'm playing, which makes no sense because it's me versus me. But if I'm playing red versus green, I'll often end up rooting for green because that's my favorite color. It doesn't make sense. I'll make suboptimal decisions with red. Green will always win. It's just what happens. So, not as much fun for that reason, but it's a great way to learn a game. The second way, I might play a non-solo game solo, is if it's already kind of a low interaction game. Castles Burgundy I mentioned is a great one. There are several others that I've had a lot of fun with. Some that you might not expect work really well. Seven Wonders Duel, for example. There are only a handful of different things in there that directly impact your opponent in the base game of that. So just building out that tableau is a lot of fun. So sometimes I'll sit down and just play both sides, kind of learn more of the cards, more of the combos, see how you can actually approach the science victory and the military victory and what it takes. It's different kinds of things like that make those kind of games a lot of fun. Other games that really work like that, I think, even some that have solo variants like Caverna or Agricola, sometimes it's more fun to play multiple characters, just because you have a little bit more tension on the board. There are others that I've greatly enjoyed kind of learning how to play against myself. Quadropolis is a great one. I learned that one playing solo, and then I've played it several times since, just because you're building a tableau. And really, anytime you're building something unique to yourself and the interaction with other players is minimized to whatever degree because of that, that makes a good solo game. You don't have to make a lot of changes. The real hard part is just when you do have to make a decision that affects the other quote-unquote player, how do you do so? And in those kind of games, you just do the best you can. The thing I like about it, playing them solo, is that they go really fast. You're playing against yourself, so you go as fast as you want. If you want to get into all the different levels of outthinking yourself, go for it, but really you can just dive in. There's a lot of games like that. I think really any Euro with low interaction kind of fits that bill. The third type of game is one that probably a lot of you have played. Not designed for solo, they're designed for multiple players, and that's any cooperative game. Cooperative games by their nature can always be played solo. The real question when you play them is how many characters do you have to play? If you are playing, Pandemic, for example, you can't just play one character and expect to win the game. You need to have those different powers available to you. So you'll probably play at least 2, probably 3 or 4 different characters. That's a game where that's very possible. It's very doable to pull off. There are other ones. Defenders of the Realm, for example, is one of our favorite games at Board Gamers Anonymous. And it works pretty well, playing with 1 or 2. You don't have to play, a litany of characters to make it work. Lord of the Rings card game. It's designed as a 1 to 2 player game. I've played it two-handed. I've played it one-handed. It is definitely easier two-handed, but you can play it with 1 and it's fine. There are plenty of good, solid cooperative games that maybe on the box do not say that they play solo, but clearly anything cooperative can be played solo. A lot of the games we're going to talk about on this podcast are cooperative games to some degree. The Goonies Adventure Card Game, that's a cooperative game. The box says 1 to 4, but it could just as easily say 2 to 4, like any other cooperative game. So if you own any cooperative games, you have not tried them solo, I would say give it a shot. I cannot think of one off the top of my head that does not work playing alone. Without a few, even with a handful of hacks to it, you can make it work. And then, not mentioned in the 3 that I mentioned, there are games that just, for whatever reason, you really, really want to play by yourself. And someone will find a way. Board Game Geek is your friend. I think even before it came out, Star Wars Rebellion, someone had built an app that would allow you to play it solo. They had designed this AI that would track and then allow you to, select the hiding place of the rebel base and then from the other side kind of track it down. That, by definition, is not a game you should be able to play solo, and someone built something so you could. Someone built something so you could play X-Wing miniatures solo. It is an 80-page campaign book. People are passionate about this. They want to be able to play their games alone when you can't get other people to play with them. There is always a way to do it. I have probably a solo variant printed off for almost all of my games that I would be interested in playing solo. If I look for one, it's out there. So never feel like you're stuck playing only the games that are designed for solo play. Some are much better than others. You're going to play some variants. They're not very good. You're going to try some cooperative games by yourself. They're not very good. That's why a lot of the games we're going to talk about on this podcast are designed for you to be played by yourself. But there are a lot of good opportunities out there to kind of dig in and try new things. So don't be afraid to give them a go. Even if it doesn't say 1 on the box, there's a lot of great stuff out there. All right, so that is everything for episode 2 of Table for One. And just make sure, if you're listening to this right now, if you're at the end of the podcast, just hop on iTunes for 2 seconds, leave a review. 5 stars would be fantastic. I'd really appreciate it. Jot down what you think. Let us know. I love your feedback. It's really going to help us grow and reach more people, especially early on. The first 2 months of a new podcast is really when you can reach people the best. And, we are also on Facebook under Board Gamers Anonymous. We are under BGA Podcast on Twitter. I post all sorts of stuff, both solo and multiplayer. You can find all that content. Hit us up on any of those channels, and I will definitely interact with you. We can discuss solo gaming. Especially, remember, call for submissions. If you have anything you want to talk about, a game you'd like to discuss, anything you'd like to review, or kind of go through together, I want to have you on. It'll be a lot more fun. It won't be just me talking by myself. But for this week, that is going to be everything for Table for One. Make sure you check back next week on episode 3. We're going to be talking about Hostage Negotiator. Also going to be talking about the Castles in Burgundy card game in a little more depth. And I'm going to be breaking open Star Trek Frontiers. So that's been sitting on the desk for a while now. I'm going to give a little bit of a comparison to Mage Knight and kind of what I think and what the major differences are there. Plus a setup and breakdown time discussion for solo games. Kind of the when is it worth it versus when is it not, depending on how much time you have available. All right, so until next week, that is everything, and thank you for joining me at this Table for One.